Hello, my name is John Ensing. I'm a licensed real estate instructor both in Florida and Louisiana. What I've developed here is I've taken the real tough questions that the licensing examiner is going to ask questions from. This theory that I put together, I've realized over the years that there's a play on words in these questions. In other words, it would be easy just to add 1 + 1 is 2. But these test writers have to put something in that creates more difficulty of the question. And what they do is they use a play on words, and I'll show you as we go throughout this questionnaire what these play on words are that can trick you to select a answer that seems right, but is not the correct answer. So these are really tough questions, and I'm going to create a analysis and how to read these questions and recognize. This is the time to do this now. Recognize the fact that they're using a play on words, and you'll be able to again, recognize and choose the right answer. Okay, so you got to really watch the play on words. I also offer private tutoring. You can go to privateturingsessions.com, privateturingsession.com, or you can email me at john.ensing@gmail.com. If you got any questions pertaining to the questions or any questions that you may have just out of the ordinary, go ahead and email me, and I correspond. I do this for students all over the U.S. All right, let's get started. Here we go. We're going to look at legal description as our first calculation. Okay, so here's a typical question that can be given on the state exam to calculate how many acres, okay, from this legal description. Remember, this comes from the government rectangular survey or the government survey method. Okay, so the farmer owns the west 1/2 of, the northwest 1/4 of, the northwest 1/4 of a section. He's selling the property for $300 per acre. What is the price of the property? Okay, now very easy calculation. Really nothing here that sets apart as far as putting any trick questions in here. The only thing that they do is they tell you of a section, okay, of a section. So here's some rules to know when you're talking about legal description. Again, it's the government survey. You've got to know this for the state exam. This is a unit of measurement, just like 12 inches in a foot, 3 feet in a yard. You've got to know that one section on the government survey map is equal to 640 acres. You have to know that. The next thing you want to know when you're calculating one of these problems is all you have to do is take the denominator of each west 1/2, northwest of 1/4, northwest of 1/4. Take the denominator of each, multiply them together to get a constant. In this case, it's 2 times 4 times 4. And then you know that the acreage you've got is 640 in a section. If I divide that by 32, which is by 2 times 4 times 4, I get 20 acres. And then from there, all I got to do, again, I got to finish the problem up. I got to go 300 per acre times 20 acres. It's going to run $6,000. For this legal description of 20 acres is $6,000. Okay. So we're talking about answer A. So really unique question. You'll probably see one of these on the state exam, how to calculate a legal description. Just take the denominator out of each one of the descriptions, multiply it together, get your total constant. All you got to do is divide that into 640, which you have to know 640 acres is in one section. Okay, and then multiply it by your price per acre. All right, the next one we're going to look at is a loan to value ratio. Loan to value ratio. This comes out of your finance section. Okay, so an LTV problem, in short, that's what it stands for, loan to value ratio, LTV. You've got to understand a couple of rule of thumbs we're going to go over in great detail. Okay, you have to understand these rules of thumb in order to calculate the right problem, because they can really throw some numbers at you in a problem like this. So let's look at the question. A house listed for $250,000. A buyer placed an offer for $240,000 to the seller, and the seller accepted the offer. The house appraised for $235,000. The lender pre-approved the buyer for an 80% loan to value, or LTV. What's the loan amount the buyer borrowed? Okay. Got a lot of numbers in here, and we have to first figure which ones apply to an LTV calculation. This is the play on words I was speaking about. Just because you see numbers in a problem does not mean you have to use them. And that's why they do this, to try to confuse the test taker. Okay? So let's look at this in detail. So here's what you got to know. These are rules to know about an LTV. This is very important, so write this down. LTV means loan to value ratio. This is the loan. It's defined in theory as the loan amount to the value of the property. It's the loan to the value of the property, okay? The loan amount, and it is a ratio as a percent. The lender always will use the contract or sales price of the home or the appraised value, whichever is less. Put a star by this number 2. Very important that you understand this. So the lender is always going to use what the contract price is or the sales price, either one, or the appraised value of the home, whichever is less. And we're going to circle back and read the problem again and apply these rules. The lender will never make a loan to a property for more than what the property is valued or what the worth of the property is. Okay, the lender's never going to go upside down in the value of a home based on a loan they lent out and be flipped into property. Now, let's look at this. Contract price is $240,000. The appraised value is $235,000. Remember, if you go back up to rule number 2, they're always going to select the contract or sales price or the appraised value, whichever is less. So out of the 240 and 235, the number you're going to use for your calculation is going to be 235,000. You may ask, John, what's 250,000? It's just a number they put in there just to confuse you. It just lists it. You don't even worry about that number because LTVs are only calculated using the, again, contract/sales price of the home or the appraised value, whichever is less. So the two numbers you really have to focus on is 240 and 235, of which 235 is the lesser of the two, so that's what we're going to use. Now, the lender's pre-approved the buyer for an 80% LTV, okay, 80%. So if I take 80% times 235,000, because that's what I'm borrowing against, that's the value of the home, I get a loan amount of $188,000. I get a loan amount for $188,000. Okay, so we're talking about what is the loan amount the buyer borrowed? They're going to borrow $188,000. So remember, when it comes to an LTV, don't get confused with all these numbers that you see in the question. You have to know the rule of thumbs or the theory behind what an LTV is. Remember, it is the loan to the value of the property, okay? The lender's, again, never gonna lend more money out than what the home's worth. And they do that by choosing whatever the contract price is or whatever the sales price is, depending on how it's worded in the problem, or the appraised value, whichever's less, okay? So in this case, we got 240,000 as the accepted offer and 235,000 is what it appraised for. So I'm going to choose the lesser of the two, 235. Again, 80% LTV is what I'm pre-approved. So I'm able to borrow, in this case, $188,000. Okay? Very easy calculation. You just got to slow down. These take, good 2 minutes on the exam. Get your worksheet out and just lay out the numbers, cross out the ones you don't need that pertain to whatever calculation you're doing. All right. Let's talk about the financiers lender's yield, what they call the financial lender's yield. Now, a buyer obtains a mortgage loan of $340,000. Okay, so that's how much the mortgage loan is for. The lender agrees to make the loan at 4% interest with the buyer to pay 3 points at closing. What is the lender's effective yield on the loan? So listen to me carefully. This is a real play on words because the first thing you're attracted to in the problem, you see 3 points. And the first thing that comes to your mind is discount points, okay? And so you're going to get a little confused calculating discount points versus calculating what the lender's yield is on the loan based on 3 points that the borrower is purchasing. Two different problems. This has nothing to do with discount points, but everything to do with what the lender's yield is or effective yield is on the loan. So let's take a look at this. Again, you have to know some certain rules when it comes to a lender's yield calculation. So discount points are used to increase the lender's yield or rate of return on the investment. So there are discount points involved here. You can't have a lender's yield, or you can't have an increase in the lender's yield or figure out the rate of the lender's yield without selling first discount points. So the lender's yield is also based on the discount points paid. Remember, from your studies in finance, 3 points equals 0.03. 2 points, 0.02, 1 point, 0.01, okay? So each point, you're going to divide by 100 to convert it to that decimal. Now, each discount point will increase the effective yield 1/8%. You have to know this. This is another one of these rules you have to know, that for each point that is sold to the buyer or borrower at closing, for each point, that is what increases the return yield to the lender. For every point, they get 1/8% back, okay? 1/8% return for every point the lender sells. You got to know that. That's one of those rules of thumb you have to know, like, 12 inches is a foot. You got to know that for each point, it brings a return to the lender of 1/8%. Now, here's the problem right here. So it's laid out. You know what the mortgage loan amount, $340,000, and the buyer agrees to pay 3 discount points. Okay. So remember, for every point, the lender's yield increases 1/8%. So if I got 3 points, I go 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8. That equals 3/8. If I divide that out, I get 0.375. And all I'm going to do is take my original interest rate of 4% in the problem, and I'm going to add that yield return, that increase, which is going to be 0.375. So my total annual percentage rate that the lender's actually making on the loan is 4.375%. Okay, so remember, rule of thumb, for every point, the lender's effective yield increases 1/8%. 3 points in this question, so I go 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8, 3/8. If I divide that out, I get 0.375. Just add it to your original 4%, and you get 4.375. In this case, it's answer C. Okay? Very easy problem to work, but it can get confusing if you don't understand the theory behind and recognize the lender's effective yield. Okay? They gave you a mortgage loan of $340,000. They give you 3 points. They give you 4%. So you really only need 2 numbers, the original interest rate and then the points. And you got to know how to convert those points to an effective yield. Remember, for each point, 1/8% increase to the lender. Okay? All right. Let's move on. Let's talk about real estate calculation when it comes to property tax. So a home has a fair market value of $300,000. The assessed rate is 10% assigned by the tax assessor. If the tax rate is 35 mills, what is the annual property tax? A lot of numbers going on here. A lot of things are going to happen here. So again, you want to have a step process to calculate property tax. Okay, so here we go. Couple rules. Remember, what is property tax? If you understand the purpose of it, it's used for county or parish and city budgets. Okay, for example, police department, fire department, public schools, our infrastructure when it comes to roads, all that has to be supported by a budget. And so they collect locally. Remember, we pay state tax and we pay federal tax, and that's for those budgets. But what are we doing about our local county, parish, or city? Well, they get it from property tax. Okay, each year we pay property tax. Now, the way this is done is each county or parish has a tax assessor that will estimate what these property taxes are. So the basic formula when you're calculating property tax is first you have to figure out what the assessed value is. Okay, assessed means what it assesses for. Okay, assessed value. So that's calculated when it says FMV, talking about fair market value. Okay, that's an appraisal that's turned into the tax assessor. So the fair market value times an assessed rate. Okay, times an assessed rate equals assessed value. Here we have 300,000. That's our fair market value, and we got an assessed rate of 10%. So we see that $30,000 is going to be our assessed value. Okay, now that we got that number, we have to multiply it by a tax rate. Our tax rate is a conversion of mills, okay, or you may see the term millage. So if you look at the problem, it says if the tax rate is 35 mills, what's the annual property tax? Well, in order to convert 35 mills to a decimal, all you do is divide the number of mills by 1,000. Because one mill, or each mill, is defined or valued at 1/1000th of a dollar. Okay, so if I take 35 and I divide that by 1,000, you can see I get 0.035. 0.035. Now all I got to do is take my assessed rate, or excuse me, assessed value, times my millage, which is 0.035 or 35 mills, and I get 1,050 is my property tax annually according to this problem. So we're talking about answer B. So again, this is a step process. First thing you need to do is calculate your assessed value. That's your fair market value times your assessed rate. Once you get your assessed value, then you got to find out how many mills there are and convert that to the decimal by dividing it by 1,000. In this case, 35 mills is 0.035 times the assessed value of 30,000, and we pay a property tax of $1,050. Answer B. All right, let's talk about eminent domain and condemnation. This is one of probably the biggest play on words that you're ever going to see on the state exam, and I'm telling you, you're going to have one, so pay attention to me closely. This is one of these trick questions. So the local government began clearing land to construct a water tower for the local community. The landowner was justly compensated for the land at fair market value. Which of the following below best describes the action of the city government? So if you take about 10 seconds, you can see we predominantly, when we read this, the first thing that comes to our mind is the government took land from the landowner, compensated them for fair market value. We're talking about eminent domain. That's the first thing we see. We tend to gravitate to certain key words and we don't break the question down. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So eminent domain is true. That is the definition. It is a power, constitutional power, that the government can take private property for public use, compensating the property owner. That's a true statement. And we kind of see that in this problem. That looks correct, as is answer B. Remember, here's what you have to know. Eminent domain is the right. And the word condemnation is the action of eminent domain, which is the right. So think of two rail cars that are hitched together. One's eminent domain, the other one is condemnation. Eminent domain is in place even as we're speaking right now. As I'm teaching you this, eminent domain is in effect. If you own land and it's 100,000 acres, the government has the right to take part of that land if they see a need for the public community, like a water tower. Could be a water tower, like in this problem. So that's in place right now, okay? They have that right. Constitutionally, they have that right to come and take that property right now. When they take it, that's called condemnation, okay? That's what's called condemnation. So let's break down this question, right? Play on words. The local city government began clearing land to construct a water tower. So those words, began clearing land, mean action. We're past the constitutional right. They're doing it, okay? They're clearing the land. They're constructing the water tower. So eminent domain, again, in review, is the right, and condemnation is the process of taking land for public use. Pay attention to the question. You got to slow down. I've instructed thousands of students, and the ones that don't pass the exam, they come back and say, John, I know this, and I tell them, I know you know this content. You know it. The problem is reading the question. Here they see, all they do is focus on what's going into the problem, and they're not breaking it down. They're just looking at eminent domain. But you have to remember that eminent domain is the right, and condemnation is the very action. And here you can see in the problem, began clearing the land to construct a water tower is action. They passed the right. So we're talking about condemnation, okay? So condemnation is the correct answer, not eminent domain, okay? Pay attention to this. This is why you got to slow down. You got to make sure you look at the play on words, because these test writers love to pull you in, and they know you're going to go for eminent domain if you read it quickly. Because if you read it quickly, that's what it seems like, okay? Remember, the local city government, that's the authority. In place is the right to take it, but here they have began clearing land, so it's condemnation, okay? And again, they're justly compensated at fair market value. This is what makes you lean towards choosing eminent domain. You see local city government. You see landowner was justly compensated for the land at fair market value. So that's what you're going for. You're going for the eminent domain, which is the wrong answer. Condemnation is the correct answer, okay? Watch this, be careful of this, go back and practice these and look at this and rest your eyes on it to make sure you learn how to read these questions and break them down and analyze, because, began clearing land to construct, just a few words makes the difference from getting an answer right and or wrong. And there's several other ones that I'll review in other videos that I'm doing that go over these play on words, okay? Remember, eminent domain is the right. Okay, listen, I hope you enjoyed this first session when it comes to hard questions, troubled questions, play on words. It's very important that you slow down and read the problem, okay? Read it very carefully, okay? Especially when it comes to math. They love putting extra numbers in there, and you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, look at all these numbers. but you have to know the theory behind what you're doing. If you know the theory, property tax, LTV, the legal description, it doesn't matter what numbers are in there, you're going to know which ones to use because it pertains to the theory and the rule of thumb. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, john.enzing@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to answer any emails. I don't charge for that. That's my service to you as a student. I really want to see you pass this exam. Okay. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.